Pop smack. Alright, so today we are going to go to the next section of our series. The last lesson we did was on, let's see, where do I go? The sheepfold. And we're going through our series on this theology called Davidic Dispensationalism. Now, I showed where Jesus is the Good Shepherd fits into his Davidic ministry. And, David was a shepherd, and he would become a king later on. So the church is his sheepfold. And I demonstrated that in Scripture, so you can check that out. Obviously, there's a difference between the sheepfold and the kingdom. Kingdom comes not with observation, but sheepfold is based on observation. If you want to gather the sheep together, you got to look and see them and get them together, or them in the right places. And while Jesus is no longer here on the earth physically, his pastors are. And so they have a duty to establish this flock as a visible church. I wanted to put some finishing touches on the concept of the church, that we understand that it is what its nature is, and that it is a visible local congregation. Now, I'm going to go ahead and read out of first section out of Tyndale's New Testament. William Tyndale was the first major translator to translate the Bible in the New Testament from the Greek directly to the English. And most of the King James is based off of his work. Now, Matthew 16, starting at verse 13. And they don't really do good on here about exactly where these. Okay, they're not numbering, so that's probably because he didn't know. When Jesus came into coast of the city, which is called Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" They said, "Some say thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, some Jeremias, or one of the prophets." He said unto them, "But whom say ye that I am?" Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said to him, "Happy art thou, Simon the son of Jonas, for flesh and blood hath not opened unto thee that, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my congregation, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." So, typically, the Catholic view has been that when he says, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church," they would say, "Ha! Peter is the rock." But in the Greek, Peter means a smooth stone, while the rock is more of a foundation, giant slab that you would build a house onto, a house's foundation, not a little pebble. And in the King James, it says that in John 1, I think it was 40. If not, just go through 38 to 42. You'll find it somewhere. Just read the whole book. But basically, it admits that Peter is a stone. Means a stone. So that doesn't sound quite right. And then many Protestants, they would argue, well, Jesus is the rock. And that sounds nice. And so it's kind of more of a ethereal, quasi type of institution. Um, this follows the Gnostic type of invisible church. But look at the context. What is the subject? Well, in verse 13, whom do men say that I am? He said, blessed are you, and upon this rock. What's he blessing him over? It was Peter's confession of faith that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. So, basically, it is faith, which is the foundation of the congregation. And the congregation would be assembled, okay, an assembly, a group of people, and you build it by getting other people to join, okay. So, it says that Jesus would build a congregation. When did Jesus build a congregation? Well, he technically already had. In Mark chapter 1, verse 16, it reads, now as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew his brother casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And Jesus said unto them, come ye after me, and I will make you become fishers of men. Straightway they forsook their nets. And when he had gone a little further thence, he saw James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, who also were in the ship mending their nets. And straightway he called them. And and they left their father Zebedee in the ship with the hired servants, and went after him. So he called them. Church is a translation of ecclesia, which means the called out ones. When it says that we are called, it could be proskaleo, call, or it could be klesis, called out. The called out ones, ecclesia, alright, Jesus had called these men together and assembled his congregation. He built his congregation. And he built his congregation on what? Upon faith. This is what the context teaches us. Okay? A church is a church based on faith in Jesus Christ. And that's what makes it. It doesn't matter the size of your building, or if you even have a building. It doesn't matter your denomination or organizational structure, or if you've got a cardinal or a pope. No. It matters if you are organized together as believers in Jesus. Now, many have argued that that was going to happen later, like at Pentecost. But I believe that Jesus had already assembled his congregation. We can see that in Matthew 18. We'll start at verse 15. Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and a publican. So there we go again. Tell it to the church. Well, if the church was not organized yet, who was Jesus telling them to go to? He's telling them at that time, go to these guys. Who are those guys? So basically, the church is a local, gathered, organized body. But yet, when we think about the church, and it's singular here, but it's going to start divvying out. It's going to start spreading. It's going to start separating. So, what do we do then? The church at this time still has some more to metamorphosize. Okay? There is a metamorphosis that has to take place for the church. Would Jesus consent to such an idea? I believe so. We'll turn to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, starting at verse 30. Alright. It says, "But their scribes and Pharisees murmured against his disciples," as Jesus' disciples, saying, "What do you eat and drink with? Why do you eat and drink with publicans and sinners?" And Jesus answering said unto them, "They that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." And many of you might recall the words of the Apostle Paul in Romans, "There is none righteous, no, not one." But Jesus is called to bring us to righteousness. None of us are at righteousness. What does he say here? Okay. Let's go back and look. And he says, "And they said unto him, Why do the disciples of John fast often, and make prayers, and likewise the disciples of the Pharisees? But thine eat and drink?" Your guys, they just eat and drink whatever. What's wrong with you? And he says, verse 34, "And he said unto them, Can ye make the children of the bride chamber hold fast, while the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and shall they fast in those days." And so what he's saying is that when Jesus is present, we're at a party. The Messiah is here. This brings us back to the Davidic covenant. And when David was present at the tabernacle of David, they were partying. Okay, this was a celebration. Now, we're not saying by that the church should only be a celebration. As it says, there will be times that we're praying and fasting because Jesus is physically located up in heaven. And that also implies that the kingdom that he's reigning from is up in heaven. It's not down here on earth. Okay? Very important point. I'm going to nail that a little bit more in a later episode. Okay? But also, let's just take... Oh, well, I'm not even halfway done. So that... Okay. "And he spake also a parable unto them. No one putteth a piece of new garment upon an old. Otherwise, then both of the new maketh a rent. And the piece that was taken out of the new agreeth not with the old." So in other words, you get a hole in your pants and you put a patch and you sew it on. Well, eventually, that patch could rip off. If it rips off, then some of the patch is ripped up and some of the old garments ripped up. Okay? The two are not compatible. And he says, "And he spake also unto them." He says, or hold on, I'll skip down. Verse 37. "And no man putteth new wine into old bottles, else the new wine will burst the bottles. and be spilt, and the bottle shall perish. But new wine must be put into new bottles, and both are preserved. No man also having drunk old wine straightway desireth new, for he saith the old is better. Now, this is the condition of the church in Jerusalem. He's going to give the church of Jerusalem a new wine bottle. He's separating them from the old wine bottle, which is national Israel. But he has to get them ready by giving them the new wine bottle. They don't fully understand the new wine yet. Why? Because they've had the old wine, the old covenant. So they're not really ready. They have to kind of start over from scratch. And this is where the ministry of the Apostle Paul is going to fit in. You see, the Jewish church got the great revelation about the fact that Jesus is the Messiah. They even learned that he rose from the dead and sat at the right hand of the Father. But they didn't fully understand the significance. They didn't understand the new wine. They had some inkling of salvation, but they still were not ready for that new wine, because they had oldness in them, and they were used to that. And the whole world, with their old wine bottles and a taste of old wine, are not ready for the new wine. There has to be a change. In other words, you must be born again. So, the Apostle Paul makes this point in the book of Romans. Romans 15, 8, and 9. It says, now I say that Jesus Christ was a minister of the circumcision for the truth of God, to confirm the promises made unto the fathers, and that the Gentiles might glorify God for his mercy, as it is written, for this cause I will confess to thee among the Gentiles, and sing unto thy name. And again he saith, rejoice ye Gentiles with his people. And again, praise the Lord, all ye Gentiles, and laud him, all ye people. And again, Isaiah said, or Isaiah, there shall be a root of Jesse, and he shall rise to reign over the Gentiles. In him shall the Gentiles trust. Now, Jesus' ministry is clearly to the, I don't know if I get that right. Okay, that was, yeah. So, Jesus' ministry was to the circumcision, and the Jewish church was to the Jews. But there will come a day, John chapter 4, where he talks to the woman at the well, starting in verse 20. And this is the woman at the well talking to him. Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Verse 21, Jesus saith unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh, when ye shall neither here in the mountain, nor yet at Jerusalem, worship the Father. Ye worship what you know not. Well, we know, you know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship him. Now, with this, you have that transition. You have that original part. It says salvations of the Jews, Jewish church. But there is a coming day. And that coming day is probably best identified as the age of grace. And this will be part of the Apostle Paul's ministry. And we'll go ahead and hit that on our next lesson with Davidic Dispensationalism.